Joining us on the broadcast now, we have with us Professor James A. Russell from the Department of National Security Affairs at the NPS, live from Monterey, California. He is an expert on U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East and has taught courses on military innovation and national security strategy. Sir, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
My pleasure.
Now, Professor, in what way do you reckon this war will change the complexion of West Asia, if at all?
It's not clear that the war is going to have this kind of dramatic strategic effect, as you suggest. We have to kind of remember that these strategic interactions between these two particular adversaries, has been going on for the last quarter-odd century, in which there are periodic bloodlettings, to put it bluntly. In which both sides haul after each other, both sides commit atrocities. And this kind of situation, we talk, for example, one of the interesting sort of commentaries that we see these days is about the intelligence surprise. And if one looks back at the pattern of these attacks and counterattacks by Israel in Gaza, it's about every 7 years. And we were coming up on the 7-year mark between the last attack. And so I can understand tactically how the Israelis may have been surprised by this, but strategically, I don't see this as a big surprise at all, which is to say that they're keeping, you can't keep hundreds of thousands of people in what is effectively a maximum security prison in Gaza under a continuous blockade and expect them not to object. And this is what's happened, and it's been horrific, of course, as we've seen. And President Biden, I think, accurately characterized the violence that has occurred as simply awful, brutal. But the point is that I don't see this as a kind of this conflict as having these follow-on strategic effects, as you suggest, despite the exchange of gunfire, as you mentioned in your report on the northern border. This would imply that you could potentially have Iranian/Hezbollah involvement, and I we all have to hope that doesn't happen. But I don't see this spinning into a wider regional conflict.
Professor, now Israel intends to eliminate Hamas once and for all. What sort of a strategy would you reckon they have in place for the same? How will they discern between Hamas militants from innocent civilians in such an offensive?
I don't see how they can do it. I don't. In other words, there's no military solution to the problem that Israel is facing with the Palestinians, and by which I mean, of course, I mean those Palestinians on the West Bank, and I mean the Palestinians in Gaza. There's no military solution to this. You cannot bomb national political aspirations and the desire for human rights out of existence. I don't care what overwhelming force you use. Israel has shown the propensity to use overwhelming force in the past to tamp down the violence and the objections to the illegal occupation by the Israelis over the years. This has not solved the problem. The military operations in Gaza, which I'm sure are going to unfold over the next week or so, this is not going to eliminate the Palestinian aspirations for self-determination and basic human rights. That doesn't go away. You can't bomb it out of existence.
Professor, I just need to pick your brain on this one. Now, Biden says the U.S. stands with Israel. Turkish president, though, has already sent out a statement from his side. He's criticized the United States for moving military assets closer to Israel. Now, Anthony Blinken is already on his way to Israel to meet the Israeli leadership. Now, Turkey says that, with U.S. getting involved, it will only create serious massacres in Gaza. Hezbollah, on the other hand, has also issued a warning from its side. Now, the first plane carrying U.S. arms has already reached Israel. I want to take, your thoughts on this. Do you feel U.S. involvement here will make matters better, or do you think it will make matters worse?
Well, you have to take a step back from this. I mean, we haven't seen this kind of crisis and crisis sort of management really since the '73 war, when President Nixon authorizes the resupply of the Israelis in the '73 war, and and Henry Kissinger at the time puts the sort of nuclear forces on alert in response to steps the Russians are making. And it's, it's a very, it was a very dangerous situation. If you want to talk about a situation that had the potential for catastrophic escalation, it was certainly the 73 war. Now, today, I would say that, of course, geopolitical, strategic circumstances are different. But the fact remains is that from the American perspective, that this is America's closest ally, perhaps in the world. There can be no question about this. Whenever the Israeli prime minister wants to come to the United States, he speaks to the joint session of Congress. He goes to the White House. I mean, in other words, the United States has a special relationship with Israel. And successive Republican and Democratic administrations have given these ironclad assurances before. And so the movement of these forces, for example, the movement of the Ford, America's newest aircraft carrier, into the Eastern Mediterranean, and some guided missile cruisers along with it, are simply an attempt to control potential escalation by outside parties. Right. Again, this represents a return to an era we all thought had kind of gone or vanished from sort of international events. So I think Erdogan, Prime Minister Erdogan, of course, is, as any regional leader, is right to be concerned about this. But from the American perspective, this is America's main regional partner. We have very deep and strong ties. And
the U.S. will be there for them, is what you're saying.
And the U.S., there can be no question about this for any American president in today's political environment, that he has to sort of state this, and he has stated it, and is operationalizing it with shipments of munitions, with forces moving into the region. So that's kind of it's a sign of our commitment to Israel's security.
U.S. remains committed to Israel. Professor, I also wanted to take your thoughts on this one, and this is a question which has baffled everyone since Saturday. What led to the intelligence failure for both Israel and the U.S.? How did they not see this coming?
Yeah, so of course, I'm not privy to any of this information. So I have no idea how, for example, the respective intelligence agencies, typically you would look at something called INW, which stands for indications and warning. So there's a group of people, I suppose, that look for indications and warning that some kind of attack is brewing. But again, I get back to this, kind of issue of tactical versus sort of strategic surprise. The Gaza's, the Hamas military operations should not come as a strategic surprise, given the political and strategic circumstance that they exist in Gaza. Tactical surprise, okay, I understand that. And I would also hasten to add that Israel is manning a border wall, right? A wall, right, around the Gaza Strip. They've got these machine gun, remotely controlled machine guns, and they've got all this concrete which has been poured to try to operationalize the land-based side of the isolation of Gaza. And of course, the reality of it all, of that is that it leads to fatigue on the part of the occupying forces. Every day they're having to show up in these places, and of course they have to man them. They have to, personnel have to move in and out.
They can't afford even a moment of laxness. They can't afford to do that. This is exactly, you've accurately characterized it. And it's difficult for any forces in such a continuously hostile environment to maintain such a hyper state of readiness. In fact, I would argue it's nearly impossible. And so there's been some other sort of speculation about this in the press. So you're saying it's impossible to keep a constant vigil there, and they did just take them by surprise. They can't always be on 24 hours.
Exactly. It's impossible to be constantly vigilant. And at the same time, again, getting to this idea of strategic surprise, that, again, from my perspective and looking up the region, over the last, 25, 30, 40 years, the only surprise to me, per se, was this hadn't happened sooner, right?
So this was bound to happen, as and when, and, from all your experience, that's what you feel that it was bound to happen.
interactions like this are bound to happen when the political circumstances that give rise to the grievance are not addressed. And if you're in the Palestinian camp and you've looked, for example, at the attempts by the United States to help engineer the normalization of relationships between Saudi Arabia and Israel, for example, with really no specific mention of the plight of the Palestinians or independent statehood and what their status is going to be, I mean, you quickly can understand, again, the frustration that they are once more being left behind by not only Israel and the United States, but the regional states as well.
Saudi Arabia, Israel can't bombard, the right for human rights, basically the need for human rights out, and definitely an attack like this was always expected. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining us and sharing all your insights from your great knowledge you have on the subject.
Cheers.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.